The purpose of this presentation is to distinguish between the different types of cells that are present in blood. On this slide, we see blood that has been centrifuged, and when you centrifuge blood, the formed elements go to the bottom of the tube. This is plasma above, but we're talking about the formed elements in this slideshow. The cellular elements generally make up about 45% of the volume of blood, and the erythrocytes, or the red blood cells, are by far the most numerous. There's 5 to 6 million of them. They're all the same, and that because their function is to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. We come to the white blood cells, see, and they're much less numerous. There's thousands per unit, whereas there's millions per unit. The unit is a cubic millimeter. There are millions compared to thousands. The white blood cells, or leukocytes, come in two types. The granulocytes, which have granules in the cytoplasm, and the agranulocytes, which have a smoother cytoplasm. If we look at the granular leukocytes, we have three types of granular leukocytes: the neutrophils, the basophils, and the eosinophils. By far the most numerous of these are the neutrophils. The neutrophils they're sometimes called polymorphonuclear leukocytes, referring to the fact that the nucleus of neutrophils has a very interesting nucleus, as you can tell. Also, they are neutral to stain. The basophils are much less numerous, as are also the eosinophils, but they stain differently. That's how you tell them apart, and they're granular. The basophils stain with the basic stain, so they look bluer, and the eosinophils stain with the eosin, which is kind of an orangish red color. So the three kinds of agranular leukocytes are the neutrophils, the basophils, and the eosinophils. Now there's two types of agranular leukocytes that do not have granules in the blood. The monocyte, it's bigger, and the nucleus doesn't fill up the whole cell. And then the lymphocytes, which is smaller, and the nucleus usually appears under the microscope. We'll look at some in a minute, to fill up the whole cell. And so let's review these. There are two categories of leukocytes, white blood cells: the granular leukocytes and the agranular leukocytes. There are three types of granular leukocytes: the neutrophils, the basophils, and the eosinophils. And they basically stain differently. The neutrophil is neutral to the stain that's used. The basophils take up the basic blue dye, and the eosinophils take up the orangish red acidic dye. And then there's two types of agranulocytes: lymphocytes and monocytes. Lymphocytes have a nucleus that almost fills up the whole cell, and monocytes are slightly bigger than lymphocytes, and they have a nucleus that's not quite occupying the whole cell. And then last of all are the platelets. The platelets are not really cells, but they're formed elements. They're pieces of cells, fragments of cells. And there's hundreds of thousands of them per cubic millimeter. So, centrifuge blood forms elements in the bottom, about 45%. Most numerous are the red blood cells or erythrocytes, millions of them. And then tens of thousands maybe of leukocytes, but they're more varied. You have your granulocytes, 3 types, the neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils. And then you have your agranular cytes, 2 types, the monocyte and the lymphocyte. And then finally you have little pieces of cells, fragments of cells, and there are hundreds of thousands of those per unit. And those are the formed elements or the cellular elements of blood. Here's another depiction. You have red blood cells. They're all the same, erythrocytes. They have hemoglobin in them, and they help transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. Then you have white blood cells, also known as leukocytes. And there's 3 types of granular leukocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, and they stain differently. This one is neutral to the stains. This one takes up the reddish stain. This one the bluish stain. And then over here we have the agranular leukocytes. You have the lymphocyte and the monocyte. And this depiction's a little bit wrong because lymphocytes are a little bit smaller than monocytes. And in the lymphocyte, the nucleus takes up the whole cell, not part of it as shown here. And then here's the platelets, which are little pieces of cells, fragments of cells, but not complete cells. Again, here's a slide that shows us what? Here's the red blood cells, here's the platelets, here are the granular leukocytes, the eosinophils, basophils, and neutrophils. And here are the agranular leukocytes without the grains, a couple of lymphocytes down there, and a monocyte up here. Another one, erythrocytes, agranular ones, lymphocytes and monocytes, granular ones, neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Now, here's a microscope slide. I'll bet you can guess what these are. There's millions of these per cubic millimeter. These are the red blood cells, or the erythrocytes. So you should be able to recognize these cells when you see them. This is an actual microscope slide with a right stain. We'll see what happens with the right stain in a future slide. Okay, here's another actual slide. You can see all the erythrocytes or red blood cells around. Okay, and over here you can see your 3 types of granulocytes, neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. And then over here you can see your 2 types of agranular leukocytes, the lymphocytes and the monocytes. So red blood cells are erythrocytes, granulocytes, neutrophil, eosinophil, basophil. Then over here, the agranular leukocytes, the lymphocyte, and the monocyte. These are polymorphonuclear leukocytes, also known as neutrophils. See the crazy nucleus inside of it? These are the most numerous of the white blood cells. In fact, they are the ones that phagocytize and eat up invading bacteria, invading microorganisms, also known as PMNs, polymorphonuclear leukocytes. Here's another microscope slide. Here's a platelet. We haven't pointed that out before. In some of the other cells, there's more of them, but there is a platelet. Most of these are red blood cells. Okay. This would be a lymphocyte. See, the nucleus is taking up almost all of the space in the cell. Here's a monocyte. So see, these are two agranular leukocytes. And then over here you see your granular leukocytes, the eosinophil. See that crazy nucleus in the neutrophil? It's the one that phagocytizes or eats up microorganisms and invading bacteria. And there's a basophil. Here's another this is a right stain. And what happens in a right stain is that the white blood cells stain this bluish, purplish color. Okay, you can see on here, if you look closely, you can see some platelets. Platelets are spread around. See, here, here, here. Take a good hard look. The platelets are the little ones. They stain. You see, there's no stain on the red blood cells. That's just, they look that color because of the hemoglobin in them. And then we see a single lonely white blood cell here, showing that the red blood cells are about 1,000 times as numerous as the white blood cells. And then this is probably a monocyte. They're hard to tell apart, but I mean, I said it backwards. This is probably a lymphocyte because the nucleus is taking up the whole volume of the cell, almost. On this slide, we see a different type of white blood cell surrounded by red blood cells. So let's look at them and see if we can tell what each one of them is. This is an easy one. It's because of the nucleus, that crazy polymorpho nucleus. So we would say that that is a neutrophil. Then over here, this is another easy one. This is definitely a lymphocyte. It is agranular, and it has a nucleus that fills up the volume of the cell. Then let's go down here. This is an eosinophil. See the reddish color? It's granular, and it has a reddish stained color, so that would be an eosinophil. Look at this one in the middle. It's agranular, but the nucleus does not fill up the entire content of the cell, so that would make that a monocyte. But it's a little bit bigger than this lymphocyte up here. And then that only leaves one left. It's granular and it stains bluish, and so that would be a basophil. So let's review them. This is a neutrophil. That's a lymphocyte. This is an eosinophil. This is a monocyte. This is a basophil. There's the monocyte. See, agranular, a little bit bigger than a lymphocyte, and no grains in the cytoplasm. This is a lymphocyte. See, the nucleus it's agranular, and the nucleus is taking up the entire volume of the cell. Here is let's see that crazy nucleus again. These are granulocytes across the bottom. That's a neutrophil. Then this is an eosinophil, so they say, I couldn't prove it by me because usually on a slide, the cytoplasm looks redder than that. And this definitely is a basophil. So why is it important to be able to recognize all these different types of cells that are in blood? The reason is they each have a different function. And so if you can see that a certain type of blood cell is too high or too low, then that can be used as a diagnosis for a particular condition. So differential counts, that's when you list how many of each of the different kinds of blood cells there are, can be invaluable in diagnosing a medical condition.